The chains bit into Dahlia's wrists with every jolt of the wagon, iron links scraping against raw skin that had long since stopped bleeding and started weeping something clear and stinging. 5 days of travel had reduced her wrists to ribbons of torn flesh, but she kept her hands folded protectively over the swell of her belly, refusing to let the metal touch the child growing within her. Her daughter. She knew it was a daughter, had known from the moment the first flutter of movement had stirred beneath her heart, a knowledge that went deeper than any healer's examination. The Ashwood delegation rode ahead on horseback, their backs straight with the arrogance of wolves who had never known true hardship. Alpha Marcus Ashwood led them, his silver-streaked hair gleaming in the weak morning sun, and even from behind Dahlia could read the satisfaction in the set of his shoulders. He had waited 3 years for an excuse to dispose of her, ever since she had refused his son's advances and shamed the heir apparent before the entire pack. The pregnancy had given him exactly what he needed. "Rogue's whore," the pack had whispered when her belly began to show, spreading her legs for any wolf that wandered through. It didn't matter that the father had been her childhood sweetheart, killed by border rogues a week before she discovered she carried his child. It didn't matter that she had screamed the truth until her voice broke. Marcus Ashwood had declared her a shame upon the pack, unfit to bear children within their territory, and the council had voted unanimously to offer her as tribute to the Alpha King's winter court. Tribute. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. She knew what it meant: servant, plaything, disposable entertainment for the wolves of the Obsidian Palace. She had heard the stories of what became of tribute wolves, the ones who arrived in chains and disappeared into the vast machinery of the king's household, never to be seen again. The wagon lurched over a frozen rut, and Dahlia's shoulder slammed against the wooden slats hard enough to drive the breath from her lungs. She bit down on a cry, her teeth sinking into her lower lip until copper flooded her tongue. She would not give them the satisfaction. 5 months pregnant, dressed in traveling clothes so thin she could feel the winter wind cutting through to her bones, wrists shackled and dignity stripped away. And still she would not let them see her break. "You are the last of the Thornwood line," her grandmother's voice whispered through her memory, soft as snow falling in moonlight. "We do not bow. We do not break. We endure." The Thornwood pack had been gone for nearly a century, scattered and absorbed after the Great Plague that had swept through the northern territories. Dahlia's grandmother had been one of the few survivors, a child hidden in the mountains until the dying stopped. She had carried her heritage with her into the Ashwood pack through an arranged mating, and she had poured it all into Dahlia. The old songs, the old words, the lullabies, in a language that fewer than a dozen wolves in the world still remembered. Dahlia's hand pressed harder against her belly, feeling the warmth of her daughter through the worn fabric of her dress. She would survive this. She would survive anything, for this child who carried both Thornwood resilience and her father's gentle heart. The Obsidian Palace rose from the winter landscape like a spear of black glass thrust through snow, its towers catching the pale sunlight and throwing it back in fractured rainbows. Dahlia had never seen anything so terrifying or so beautiful. The walls seemed to absorb the light around them, creating pools of shadow that moved and shifted like living things, and the gates, massive iron structures worked with wolves and moons and ancient runes, stood open to receive them. Guards in black and silver livery flanked the entrance, their eyes tracking the Ashwood procession with the flat assessment of predators evaluating prey. Dahlia felt their gazes catch on her chains, on her belly, on the thin dress that offered no protection against the bitter cold. She straightened her spine despite the ache in her shoulders and met their stares without flinching. "We do not bow. We do not break." The wagon rolled to a stop in a courtyard of polished black stone, and rough hands hauled Dahlia over the side before she could brace herself. Her feet hit the frozen ground hard enough to jar her teeth, and only a desperate grab at the wagon's edge kept her from falling. The guard who had pulled her down stepped back with a look of mild disgust, wiping his hands on his uniform as if touching her had contaminated him. "The tribute," Alpha Marcus announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard with practiced authority. "As promised in my correspondence with His Majesty's steward." A steward in immaculate gray robes descended the palace steps, his expression carefully neutral as he assessed the scene before him. His gaze lingered on Dahlia's chains, on the angry wounds visible at her wrists, on the swell of her belly beneath her inadequate clothing. "The king will receive you in the throne room," the steward said, and something flickered behind his eyes. Pity, perhaps, or warning. "Follow me." The throne room stretched toward shadows, its vaulted ceiling lost in darkness despite the hundreds of candles burning in iron chandeliers. Black stone columns marched down either side of a central aisle, carved with scenes of wolves in battle, wolves in triumph, wolves beneath a moon so detailed Dahlia could almost feel its light on her skin. And at the far end, raised on a dais of obsidian, sat the throne. The Alpha King did not sit so much as inhabit his throne, his massive frame dominating the carved seat as if it had been built around him. He was larger than any wolf Dahlia had ever seen, shoulders broad enough to block out the light of the candles behind him. And even at rest, there was something coiled about him, something that spoke of violence held in perfect check. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, and his face. His face was a landscape of sharp angles and shadowed eyes, beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, all danger and no softness. He watched their approach with the absolute stillness of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere left to run. Alpha Marcus strode forward with Dahlia stumbling behind, the guard's hand a bruising grip on her arm. When they reached the foot of the dais, Marcus swept into a bow that managed to be both deferential and smug. "Your Majesty, I present Dahlia Stormborn, formerly of the Ashwood Pack. She carries a rogue's bastard and has been cast out for her shame." His lips curved in a smile that made Dahlia's stomach turn. "Damaged goods, I'm afraid, but perhaps she may serve some purpose in your household. You may dispose of her as you see fit." Dahlia kept her chin raised, one hand pressed to her belly, and refused to let her gaze drop even as humiliation burned through her veins like acid. She could feel every eye in the throne room on her, the courtiers in their fine silks, the guards in their black and silver, the steward with his carefully blank expression. They were all waiting to see what the Alpha King would do with his broken tribute. The king rose. The movement was fluid, unhurried, and somehow terrifying in its grace. He descended the steps of the dais one by one, each footfall silent on the black stone, and with every step Dahlia felt something shift in the air around her. Pressure built against her skin, against her lungs, against the animal part of her that had been silent for so long. He stopped 3 feet away, and his eyes met hers. Gold. The word blazed through her mind as amber bled into irises that had been dark as midnight, the transformation happening in the space between one heartbeat and the next. A sound tore from his chest, low, rough, possessive, and heat flooded Dahlia's veins like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Warmth she had forgotten existed, warmth that reached into every frozen corner of her soul and demanded that she feel. Her wolf slammed against her skin, awakening from the numb sleep of months, with a recognition so fierce it stole her breath. "Mate!" The word roared through every fiber of her being. "Mate! Mate! Mate!" The Alpha King's hand reached toward her face and Dahlia saw it trembling. This massive predator, this ruler of wolves, shaking as he fought for control. "Mine," he breathed, the word barely human. Then his gaze dropped to her belly, to the child she carried beneath her heart, and something shifted in his expression. The gold in his eyes blazed brighter, fiercer, and when he turned toward Alpha Marcus, the snarl that tore from his throat made every wolf in the room drop to their knees. "You dared bring my mate to me in chains." The silence that followed Sebastian's snarl was absolute, the kind of silence that preceded storms and executions. Dahlia watched Alpha Marcus's face drain of color, watched the smug satisfaction curdle into something closer to terror as he scrambled backward on his knees, his hands raised in desperate supplication. "Your Majesty, I had no way of knowing. You brought a pregnant woman to my court in chains." Sebastian's voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, and somehow that was worse than the roar, worse than the snarl. This was the voice of a predator who had already decided his prey would die and was simply savoring the moment before the kill. "You dragged her across 5 days of frozen roads in clothing unfit for a beggar. You allowed your guards to handle her roughly enough to wound her." His hand was still extended toward Dahlia's face, trembling with the effort of restraint, and she found she could not look away from his eyes. Gold had consumed the darkness entirely now, turning his gaze into something ancient and primal, something that spoke directly to the wolf inside her. "Mate." That wolf howled again, pressing against her skin with an urgency she had never felt before. "Our mate. He came for us. He found us." "The pregnancy," Marcus stammered. "She carries a rogue's child, not... She carries my heir." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples through the assembled court. Dahlia heard gasps, whispers, the rustle of silk as courtiers turned to one another with wide eyes. But she could not process any of it, could not focus on anything beyond the Alpha King standing before her, claiming her child, claiming her, with a certainty that defied everything she had been told about how the world worked. "That's not..." she started, her voice emerging as a rasp, and Sebastian's gaze snapped back to her face with an intensity that stole the rest of her words. "You are my mate." His hand finally completed its journey, his palm cupping her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible given the violence barely contained in every line of his body. His skin burned against hers, heat flooding through the contact and spreading down her spine, pooling low in her belly where her daughter kicked in sudden recognition. "The child you carry will be raised as mine, loved as mine, protected as mine. This is not negotiable." Dahlia's legs threatened to buckle. 5 months of terror, 5 months of shame, 5 months of preparing herself to fight alone for her daughter's survival. And now this wolf she had never met was looking at her like she was the answer to prayers she hadn't known he'd been making. "I don't understand," she whispered. Something softened in his face, the gold in his eyes flickering with an emotion she couldn't name. "You will," he said. "I will explain everything. But first..." His attention shifted past her, and his voice hardened back into the tone of a king delivering judgment. "Guards, take Alpha Marcus and his delegation to the cells. They will remain there until I decide what to do with wolves who abuse women under their protection." "Your Majesty," Marcus's voice cracked with panic. "I am an alpha. You cannot." "You were an alpha." Sebastian's smile held no warmth. "Your pack forfeited your sovereignty the moment you put chains on my mate. Be grateful I am allowing you to keep breathing while I consider whether to extend that mercy." Guards materialized from the shadows, their hands closing on Marcus's arms with efficient brutality. Dahlia watched him dragged away, his protests echoing off the vaulted ceiling, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, nothing but the overwhelming awareness of Sebastian's hand still warm against her cheek, and the bond pulsing between them like a living thing. "Can you walk?" Sebastian asked, his voice soft again, meant only for her. Dahlia tested her legs and found them unreliable. "I'm not certain." Without hesitation, Sebastian bent and swept her into his arms, cradling her against his chest as if she weighed nothing at all. A collective intake of breath swept through the throne room, the Alpha King carrying his mate, her chains still attached, her worn dress brushing against his fine clothing. It was improper, scandalous, a king lowering himself to serve rather than be served. He didn't seem to notice or care. "The Queen's chambers," he said to the steward, who had risen from his knees with an expression of carefully managed shock. "Have the healers attend us there, and send someone to remove these chains before I tear them off myself and use them to strangle whoever first suggested putting them on her." "At once, Your Majesty." Dahlia's head fell against Sebastian's shoulder, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion she had been fighting for days. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her ear, steady and strong, and the warmth of his arms around her seemed to reach into places that had been cold for so long she had forgotten warmth existed. "Why?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Why what? Why any of this? You don't know me. You don't know anything about me except what Marcus told you." And none of that was true. Sebastian's arms tightened around her, a protective gesture that made her wolf curl with contentment even as her human mind struggled to make sense of what was happening. "I know you are my mate," he said simply. "I have been waiting for you for 32 years. I know that you are strong enough to stand before a king with your chin raised despite everything that has been done to you. I know that you protected your child with your bare hands for 5 days of travel, accepting injuries to yourself to keep the chains from touching your belly." His voice dropped lower, roughening. "I know that anyone who harmed you will answer for it. I know that you will never be cold or hungry or afraid again while I draw breath." Tears burned behind Dahlia's eyes, tears she had not allowed herself to shed since the night Marcus had declared her banishment, since the night her whole world had collapsed into chains and shame, and the terrifying certainty that she would have to save herself and her daughter alone. "You don't even know my name," she managed. "Dahlia Stormborn, formerly of the Ashwood Pack." His lips brushed against her hair, so light she might have imagined it. "Soon to be Dahlia Windrider, Luna Queen of the Winter Court." A pause. "If you will have me." She didn't answer. She couldn't. The words tangled in her throat, caught between the desperate hope that had bloomed in her chest and the cold voice of experience reminding her that wolves who seemed kind often hid the cruelest teeth. She had trusted before. She had believed before. And look where it had landed her. But her wolf knew no such caution. Her wolf was already reaching for him, straining toward the bond that hummed between them, desperate to be claimed and to claim in return. The Queen's chambers were vast and beautiful, all dark wood and rich fabrics, and windows that looked out over snow-covered mountains. Sebastian laid her on a bed so soft she nearly cried again from the simple pleasure of it, and then he knelt beside her, the Alpha King of the Winter Court, on his knees beside her bed, and began to work at the locks on her chains. "These should have been removed the moment you arrived," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The steward will answer for allowing you to enter my presence still bound. It wasn't his fault. Marcus's guards are currently being reminded of the consequences of abusing wolves under my protection." The first lock clicked open, and Sebastian's fingers found her wrist, carefully avoiding the raw wounds. His jaw clenched at the sight of them, gold flashing through his eyes again. "I will kill them for this." "Please don't." The words surprised her, but she pressed on. "Not for my sake. I don't want blood spilled in my name." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and some of the predatory fury in his expression gave way to something more complex. "You would show mercy to wolves who did this to you? I would choose not to begin my life in this court with executions." She met his gaze steadily, willing him to understand. "Whatever I am to be here, I would rather be known for peace than for vengeance." For a long moment Sebastian was silent. Then slowly, he nodded. "Exile, then. To the human territories, without their wolves. They will live, but they will live as less than they were." It was more mercy than they deserved, and they both knew it. But he had listened. He had heard her preference and adjusted his response, even though he was the Alpha King and she was a tribute in chains. Different, her wolf whispered. He is different. Sebastian returned his attention to the second lock, his fingers gentle despite their size as he maneuvered around her injuries. When that chain fell away, he lifted her wrist to his lips and pressed a kiss to the damaged skin, so light it barely touched her, but the tenderness of it stole her breath. A healer is coming to tend these properly, he said, and I will have salve brought from my own stores, thornwood moon petal, combined with silverbloom, the most effective treatment for iron wounds. Dahlia stared at him. How do you know about thornwood medicines? I make it my business to know things. He smiled, and the expression transformed his face, softening the sharp angles into something almost approachable. The Thornwood pack may be scattered, but their knowledge survives in the royal archives. I have scholars who can tell you things your grandmother might have forgotten. Her grandmother. The lullabies, the old words, the language that fewer than a dozen wolves in the world still remembered. Dahlia's eyes burned again, and this time a tear escaped, tracking down her cheek before she could stop it. Sebastian caught it with his thumb, his palm cupping her face again with that impossible gentleness. Tell me what you need, he said. Anything. Everything. It's yours. I need. Her voice broke. I need to understand what this is. What we are. I don't know how to be a mate. I don't know how to be a queen. I don't know how to be anything except a survivor trying to keep my daughter alive. Then that is what you will be, for as long as you need. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. I will not claim you until you choose it. I will not touch you beyond what you permit. These chambers have a lock on the inside, and you have my word as Alpha King that I will not enter without your invitation. Whatever happened to you before this day, whatever taught you to expect cruelty from those who should have protected you, I am not that. I will prove it to you, day by day, until you believe it. The wolf in her chest howled at the thought of locking him out. But the woman who had learned that wolves could be monsters, felt something careful and precious unfold in her heart. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of trust. And the baby? Is mine from this moment forward. No hesitation, no calculation. Your daughter will want for nothing. She will be loved, protected, raised as the princess she is by birth, and the heir she will become by my choice. And when she is old enough to understand, I will tell her about her father, a good wolf who loved you, who deserved to live, who would be proud of the mother his child has. Dahlia broke then, the sobs she had been holding back for 5 months finally tearing free of her control. Sebastian gathered her against his chest, holding her while she cried, his hand stroking her hair and his voice murmuring words she couldn't make out, but that somehow still soothed her. She didn't know how long she wept. She only knew that when the tears finally slowed, she was still wrapped in his arms, and he had not let go, and the bond between them pulsed with a warmth that felt like coming home. The sobs had left her hollow in the best way, emptied of the poison she had been carrying for months. Dahlia became aware of Sebastian's heartbeat beneath her ear, steady and strong. A rhythm her own pulse seemed determined to match. His hand had stilled in her hair, resting warm against the back of her head, and she realized with a flush of embarrassment that she had soaked the front of his formal tunic with her tears. I've ruined your clothes, she said, her voice rough. I have others. His chest rumbled with something that might have been laughter. Though I confess, none of them have been improved quite so dramatically. She pulled back just enough to look at him, and found his gold eyes watching her with an expression she couldn't name. Tender, perhaps, or wondering, as if she were something precious he hadn't expected to find. The bond between them hummed, and she felt an echo of his emotion through it. Fierce protectiveness, barely leashed desire, and beneath it all, a patience that seemed to have no bottom. A knock at the door made her flinch before she could stop herself. Sebastian's jaw tightened, and she felt a flash of his anger through the bond. Not at her, she realized, but at whoever had taught her to fear a simple sound. "That will be the healer," he said, his voice carefully gentle. "May I let them in?" She nodded, pulling the blankets higher around herself as Sebastian rose from the bed. He moved to the door with a predator's grace, opening it just enough to speak to whoever waited on the other side. Dahlia caught fragments of the conversation. "Wounds are severe. And the thornwood salve I requested." And then a woman's voice, cool and professional, saying something about examining the patient. But it was another voice that made Dahlia's blood run cold. "Your Majesty?" The words were honeyed, smooth as silk over steel. "I heard there was some disturbance in the throne room. I came as quickly as I could to offer my assistance." Sebastian's shoulders went rigid. Through the bond, Dahlia felt a surge of irritation so sharp it almost tasted metallic. "Lady Neve, your concern is noted but unnecessary. Return to your chambers. Surely you need someone to help manage the court's response to this situation." A pause, deliberate and pointed. "The nobles are already whispering about the tribute. A pregnant wolf, brought in chains. The optics are challenging, to say the least. I could help smooth." I said return to your chambers. The alpha command in his voice made Dahlia's wolf shiver with recognition. She heard the woman, Lady Neve, draw a sharp breath, and then footsteps retreating down the corridor, each one carrying the weight of barely contained fury. Sebastian stepped aside to let the healer enter, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes and capable hands. But Dahlia's attention stayed fixed on the doorway, on the space where Lady Neve's voice had come from. "Who was that?" she wanted to ask. "Why does my wolf want to snarl at the sound of her name?" But the healer was already approaching the bed, and Sebastian was closing the door, and the questions would have to wait. 3 days passed before Dahlia saw Lady Neve Bloodmoon in person. She had spent those days recovering, sleeping more than she had in months, eating food that actually nourished rather than barely sustained, allowing the thornwood salve to work its slow magic on her wounded wrists. Sebastian visited each evening, bringing her books from the royal archives about Thornwood history, sitting beside her bed while she read, sometimes simply watching her with those gold eyes that made her feel both safe and terrified. They hadn't discussed the bond again. They hadn't needed to. It pulsed between them constantly now, a second heartbeat she couldn't ignore, and she found herself reaching for it in quiet moments, checking to see if he was near, feeling the texture of his emotions, learning the shape of him through this connection she still didn't fully understand. On the fourth morning, Dahlia insisted on leaving her chambers. "The nobles need to see me," she told Sebastian when he arrived to check on her. "If I hide in here, they'll think I'm ashamed. Or weak." His expression flickered with something between pride and concern. "You're still healing." "I've been healing my whole life. I can do it while walking." He studied her for a long moment, and she felt him testing the bond, not intrusively, but gently, checking her resolve, her strength. Whatever he found there must have satisfied him, because he offered her his arm with a small nod. "Then let me show you your kingdom, my queen." The throne room was different in daylight. Sunlight streamed through windows she hadn't noticed before, catching on crystal chandeliers that scattered rainbows across the obsidian floors. Wolves in fine clothing moved between clusters of conversation, their voices dropping to whispers as Dahlia entered on Sebastian's arm. She kept her chin raised, her hand steady against his forearm, her pace unhurried. Let them look. Let them see the tribute they had expected to find broken, walking beside their king as if she belonged there. Because she did belong there. The bond told her so with every step. "Your Majesty." A woman stepped into their path, and Dahlia recognized the voice immediately, that honeyed smoothness, that steel beneath silk. "How wonderful to see you recovered enough to join us." Lady Neve Bloodmoon was beautiful in the way that winter was beautiful, cold, sharp, and capable of killing the unprepared. Her hair was silver blonde, swept up in an elaborate style that spoke of hours with servants. Her gown was white trimmed with ice blue, and her eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, fixed on Dahlia with an intensity that made her wolf press forward, hackles rising. Lady Neve? Sebastian's voice was cordial, but Dahlia felt the tension in his arm beneath her fingers. I don't believe you've been formally introduced to Lady Dahlia Stormborn. Stormborn. Neve's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. How evocative. I wasn't aware the Ashwood Pack had such dramatic naming conventions. My mother chose my name, Dahlia said, keeping her voice even. She said I was born during a thunderstorm so fierce it shook the foundations of our den. Charming. Neve's gaze dropped to Dahlia's belly, lingering there with an expression Dahlia couldn't read. And when is the happy event expected? 4 months. Such a blessing. Children are so precious. Neve's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Especially when they're born into uncertain circumstances. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Sebastian's arm went rigid beneath Dahlia's hand, and she felt the surge of his fury through the bond, hot, protective, barely contained. But before he could speak, Dahlia stepped forward. There's nothing uncertain about my daughter's circumstances, she said quietly. She will be born in the Alpha King's palace, raised as his heir, and protected by his power. Any wolf who suggests otherwise will answer to him. She paused, letting her own wolf rise just enough to show in her eyes. And to me. Neve's smile faltered for just a moment, a crack in the ice, before she recovered. Of course. I meant no offense. I simply worry. For you, and for your child. Court can be so treacherous for those unfamiliar with its currents. Then I'm fortunate to have such concerned subjects eager to guide me. The words were perfectly polite, perfectly correct, and perfectly clear in their meaning. I see you. I know what you are. Something shifted in Neve's pale eyes, recognition perhaps, or the beginning of respect for an opponent she hadn't expected. Indeed you are, Lady Dahlia. Indeed you are. She curtsied with mechanical precision and withdrew into the crowd, but Dahlia felt her gaze lingering like frost on exposed skin. Sebastian's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. You handled that well? I've known wolves like her before. Dahlia watched Neve's silver blonde head moving through the crowd, stopping to whisper to first one noble, then another. Pretty words hiding poison fangs. She wanted something from you, didn't she? Before I arrived? The throne beside mine. Sebastian's voice was flat. She's spent 5 years positioning herself for it. And now I've taken it from her. You've taken nothing. It was never hers to have. He turned to face her fully, his gold eyes burning with an intensity that stole her breath. The moon goddess chose you for me. Not her. Not anyone else. You. Dahlia wanted to believe him. The bond wanted her to believe him, pulsing with warmth and certainty and the steady drumbeat of mate, mate, mate. But she had seen the look in Neve's eyes, that flash of calculation, that flicker of hatred quickly hidden, and her wolf knew what her heart didn't want to accept. Lady Neve Bloodmoon was not going to give up so easily. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later. Dahlia had fallen into a routine, breakfast with Sebastian in his private study, a walk through the palace gardens to strengthen her legs, quiet afternoons reading Thornwood histories while her daughter kicked and shifted inside her. The healers said the baby was strong, growing well, that the rest and proper nutrition were doing wonders. But on that morning, Dahlia woke feeling wrong. Not sick exactly. Not pain. Just wrong. A heaviness in her limbs that hadn't been there before. A fog in her mind that made it difficult to focus. She had to read the same paragraph 3 times before the words made sense, and even then, they slipped away like water through her fingers. "You're pale," Sebastian said when he arrived for their usual breakfast. His hand went immediately to her forehead, checking for fever. "Did you sleep?" "I slept." The words felt thick in her mouth. "I just... I'm tired." His eyes narrowed and she felt him reaching through the bond, checking her the way he had that first night. Carefully, respectfully, but thoroughly. Whatever he found there made his jaw tighten. "I'm calling the healer." "Sebastian, I'm fine." "You're not fine." He was already moving toward the door. "Your heartbeat is slower than it should be. Your wolf feels... muted. Something is wrong." The healer, the same gray-haired woman from that first night, arrived within minutes. She examined Dahlia with gentle efficiency, checking her pulse, her eyes, the color of her gums, the responsiveness of her wolf to simple commands. By the time she finished, her kind face had gone carefully blank. "I need to examine her tea," the healer said to Sebastian. "The tea she's been drinking each morning." "It's just pregnancy tea." Dahlia gestured weakly toward the pot on her breakfast tray. "One of the servants brings it. Lady Neve recommended it. She said it would help with the morning sickness." The silence that followed was absolute. Sebastian crossed the room in 3 strides, lifting the teapot and bringing it to his nose. His eyes went gold, then darker, then blazed with a fury that made Dahlia's wolf whimper in recognition of an alpha's rage. "Moonbane," he said, his voice barely human. Diluted, but moonbane. "She's been poisoning my mate." The healer was already moving, pulling vials from her bag. "I need to start treatment immediately." The dose was small. She would have made it look like complications from the pregnancy. Weakness, fatigue, and eventually... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Dahlia's hand went to her belly, where her daughter had gone still. "The baby," she whispered. "Is the baby... The baby is alive." The healer's voice was firm. "The poison was meant to work slowly to make it look natural. We caught it in time. But you cannot drink anything that hasn't been tested by me personally, do you understand? Nothing. Not water, not tea. Nothing." Sebastian was trembling. She could feel it through the bond. Not fear, but rage so pure and cold it burned like ice. He was holding himself back, she realized, holding himself here, with her, when every instinct was screaming at him to hunt down Neve Bloodmoon and tear her apart. "Don't," Dahlia said, reaching for him. "Not yet. We need proof." "I have proof. The tea came from a servant. Neve will claim she knew nothing about it. She'll sacrifice the servant and walk free, and then she'll try again with something we can't trace." Dahlia pulled him down beside her on the bed, gripping his hand with what strength she had left. "I need you to be patient. I need you to be clever. Can you do that for me?" The war in his eyes was terrible to watch. The alpha demanding blood, the king understanding strategy, the mate wanting only to protect. For a long moment she thought he would refuse, that he would storm out and find Neve and end this with his teeth and claws, consequences be damned. But then his forehead dropped to touch hers, and she felt the decision settle through the bond like a stone sinking into deep water. "For you," he said roughly. "Anything. For you." Dahlia closed her eyes, feeling her daughter stir weakly in her belly, feeling the poison still sluggish in her veins, feeling the bond between her and Sebastian pulse with fury and fear, and the first sharp edges of a war they hadn't asked for, but could no longer avoid. Neve had made her move. Now it was time for Dahlia to make hers. The winter ball arrived 3 weeks later, and Dahlia was ready. She had spent those weeks recovering, letting the healer's treatments purge the moonbane from her blood, while Sebastian raged silently beside her. Every day he brought her meals he had personally watched the kitchen prepare. Every night he held her while she slept, his hand spread protectively over her belly where their daughter had begun to move again, stronger now, fighting just as her mother fought. And while her body healed, her mind had worked. She had learned the patterns of court, who whispered to whom, whose loyalty could be bought, and whose was genuine. She had studied the Thornwood histories Sebastian's scholars brought her, reading about the gifts her bloodline carried, abilities that had made her ancestors feared and respected in equal measure, the truth compelling, the voice that could not be denied. Her grandmother had never spoken of it directly, but the knowledge was there in the old songs, hidden in phrases Dahlia had memorized as a child without understanding their meaning. The Thornwood speaks, and lies fall silent. The Thornwood commands, and truth rises. Tonight, she would find out if the power was real. The great hall blazed with light, ice sculptures glittering between tables laden with food, nobles in their finest silks and furs swirling through dances that looked more like battles than celebrations. Dahlia entered on Sebastian's arm, wearing a gown of deep violet that made her dark hair gleam and her pregnancy impossible to hide. Let them look, she thought. Let them see the Alpha King's mate, carrying the heir to his throne. Let Neve see the woman she had tried to murder. The whispers started immediately. Tribute bride, rogue's bastard, how dare she? But they died just as quickly when Sebastian's gaze swept the room. His arm was steady beneath her hand, but Dahlia could feel the tension coiled in him, the wolf barely leashed. He had wanted to arrest Neve immediately, to drag her before the court in chains and pronounce judgment. But Dahlia had asked him to wait, to trust her, and he had. Now the waiting was over. She spotted Neve across the hall, resplendent in white and ice blue, holding court among a cluster of nobles who hung on her every word. The woman's pale eyes found Dahlia's across the crowded room, and for just a moment her mask slipped. Triumph flickered there, poorly hidden satisfaction. She thought the poison was still working, Dahlia realized. She thought her enemy was weakened, vulnerable, easy prey. She was wrong. Stay close, Dahlia murmured to Sebastian. But let me speak first. Dahlia. Trust me. She squeezed his arm, letting him feel through the steel beneath her calm exterior. I need to do this. For our daughter. For myself. He was silent for a long moment, golden eyes searching her face. Then he nodded once, sharp and certain. I'm right beside you. She crossed the hall like a queen, the crowd parting before her instinctively. Nobles who had sneered at her arrival now scrambled to bow, to murmur greetings, to avoid the Alpha King's burning gaze. Dahlia ignored them all, her attention fixed on Neve's silver blonde head, on the woman who had tried to kill her child. Lady Neve. Her voice cut through the chatter, clear and carrying. How lovely to see you again. I believe I owe you thanks for the pregnancy tea you recommended. Something flickered in Neve's pale eyes, surprise, quickly hidden. Lady Dahlia, you look remarkably well. I had heard you were unwell. Had you? Dahlia smiled, and it was her grandmother's smile, the one that promised storms. Strange. I wonder who could have told you that. The nobles surrounding them had gone silent, sensing blood in the water. Dahlia felt Sebastian's presence at her back, solid and reassuring, but she kept her focus on Neve, on the woman's careful composure, on the cracks she could already see forming. I'm sure the rumors simply, Neve began. Speak your true intentions. The words came from somewhere deeper than Dahlia's throat, resonating with a power she hadn't known she possessed. She felt it rise through her like a tide, ancient and inexorable, and watched Neve's face go white as the compulsion took hold. Neve's jaw worked, fighting it, her hands clenched at her sides, veins standing out in her neck as she struggled against the command. But the Thornwood gift was not meant to be resisted. I intended to kill you, both of you. The poison was meant to be untraceable. You would have grown weaker and weaker until your heart simply stopped, and the brat would have died with you. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sebastian's growl vibrated through the air, and Dahlia felt Nobles shrinking back from the raw fury radiating from him. But she wasn't finished. "And the Ashwood Alpha?" she pressed, her voice still carrying that terrible resonance. "What was your arrangement with him?" Sweat beaded on Neve's brow. Her wolf was howling behind her eyes, desperate to escape. But the truth continued to pour from her lips. "He forged evidence that you murdered pack members. In exchange for territory after Sebastian rejected you, after you died, and he was forced to find a more suitable queen. Me. It was always supposed to be me." The hall had gone absolutely silent, every eye fixed on Neve, on the confession spilling from her lips, on the ruin of her carefully constructed facade. "You were nothing," Neve spat, the compulsion forcing honesty even through her hatred. "A discarded tribute, a vessel for another wolf's bastard. And he chose you over me. 5 years of patience, 5 years of positioning, destroyed by some pregnant whore in chains." Sebastian moved. One moment he stood beside Dahlia. The next, his hand was around Neve's throat, lifting her off her feet like she weighed nothing at all. His eyes had gone pure gold, no trace of human reason left, and the sound that tore from his chest was not a growl, but something older, something that made every wolf in the room bare their throats in submission. "Sebastian." Dahlia's hand found his arm, gentle but firm. "Not like this." The muscles beneath her fingers trembled with restraint. Through the bond, she felt his wolf howling for blood, demanding the death of the woman who had threatened his mate, his child. But beneath that rage was something else. Trust. Trust in her, in her judgment. Slowly, terribly, he lowered Neve until her feet touched the floor, but he didn't release her throat. "Pronounce sentence," he said, his voice barely recognizable. "She is yours to judge." Dahlia faced the woman who had tried to murder her daughter. Neve's pale eyes were wide with fear now. All her composure shattered. Her careful plans collapsed around her like a castle built on sand. She looked small, pathetic. Exactly what she had called Dahlia when she arrived in chains. "This child," Dahlia said quietly, her hand resting on her belly where her daughter kicked in recognition, "will be Alpha. She will rule territories you'll never see again. She will be loved by her father and protected by the most powerful pack in the realm. And you?" She leaned closer, letting Neve see the steel in her eyes. "You will be nothing." Sebastian released Neve, and she crumpled to the polished floor. Guards moved forward at some unseen signal, hauling her upright, and she struggled weakly against their grip. "The breaking ritual," Sebastian announced, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "She will be stripped of her wolf and exiled to human lands. Let her live out her days among those who cannot smell the rot in her soul." "No." Neve's composure shattered completely. "No, please. Not my wolf. I'll do anything. You should have thought of that before you poisoned my mate." The ritual was ancient and terrible. Dahlia watched without flinching as the shamans drew their circles on the floor, as Neve screamed and begged and cursed, as something vital was ripped from behind her eyes, and the woman who remained was merely human, empty, broken in a way that would never heal. When it was over, when the guards dragged Neve's limp form toward the doors that would lead to the human territories beyond the wards, Dahlia spoke one last time. "Run far," she said softly. "My daughter will rule territories you'll never see again." The moon hung full and silver over the palace gardens, casting everything in pale light that turned the snow to scattered diamonds. Sebastian had carried Dahlia here after the ball, away from the whispers and the congratulations, and the nobles desperate to curry favor with the new power in court. She needed silence. She needed him. You were magnificent, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I have never seen anything more beautiful than you destroying her. I almost felt sorry for her. Dahlia leaned against him, exhausted but triumphant. Almost. Don't. His arms tightened around her. She would have killed our daughter. She would have taken you from me before I ever truly had you. Our daughter. The words sent warmth flooding through her, mingling with the steady pulse of the mate bond. He had claimed her child from the moment of recognition, had never once hesitated or wavered. The father her daughter deserved. Sebastian. She turned in his arms, looking up at his face painted silver by moonlight. I want to complete the bond. His breath caught. She felt the surge of hope through their connection, fierce and desperate and carefully restrained. You're certain? After everything tonight, you should rest. I've been waiting my whole life for this. She reached up to trace the sharp line of his jaw. I've been waiting for you without knowing it. I'm tired of waiting. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and she felt his wolf pressing forward, felt her own wolf rising to meet it. When they broke apart, his eyes blazed gold and his fangs had lengthened, the predator emerging from beneath the king's control. Here, he said roughly, under the moon, the way it was done in the old times. He lowered her to the ground, cushioned by his cloak spread across the snow, and traced the curve of her neck with reverent fingers. The junction where shoulder met throat. The place where wolves had marked their mates since the beginning of their kind. I have waited 32 years for you, he said, his voice breaking. I had given up. I thought the goddess had forgotten me. And then you walked into my throne room in chains, and I knew you were worth every moment of loneliness. Show me, she whispered. Show me what you felt. His fangs sank into her flesh. The pain was sharp and bright, blooming where his teeth pierced her skin, and then, she felt everything. 32 years of loneliness, of watching other wolves find their mates, while his throne sat empty beside him. The desperate hope he had tried to bury, the conviction that he was somehow unworthy of the bond. And then, the moment he saw her, chains on her wrists and defiance in her eyes, and his whole world had narrowed to a single blazing certainty. Her, only her, forever her. She felt his rage at the wolves who had hurt her, his fierce protectiveness over the child she carried, his wonder that such strength could exist in someone who had been so broken. She felt the depth of his love, not despite her scars, but because of them, because she had survived, because she had never stopped fighting. The pain transformed to pleasure, spreading through her veins like liquid gold, and she gasped as the bond expanded, deepened, became something unbreakable. But she wasn't finished. She rose up against him, her own wolf surging forward with ancient instinct, and found the junction of his neck and shoulder with her teeth. He shuddered beneath her, a groan tearing from his throat, and then she bit down. Mine, she thought as her fangs pierced his skin. Yours, she felt him answer through the bond. Through the mark she was creating, she showed him everything she had never spoken aloud. The terror of being cast out, the loneliness of carrying her child with no one to protect her. The moment she had looked into his eyes and felt her frozen heart begin to thaw. The fierce, unexpected love that had grown despite her fear, despite the poison, despite everything. She showed him her daughter's heartbeat, the life she carried that would bind their families together. She showed him her grandmother's lullabies, the old words she thought were lost forever. And she showed him the future she wanted, the three of them together, their pack strong and united, their love a foundation that nothing could shake. Mate, she growled against his skin, feeling the word vibrate through both of them. Mate, he answered, his voice shattered with emotion. They held each other in the snow while the moon watched over them, feeling the bond settle into their bones like it had always been there, just waiting to be claimed. His heartbeat synchronized with hers, his wolf curled around her wolf in perfect contentment. For the first time since her mother died, Dahlia felt truly home. 6 weeks later, Dahlia stood at the window of the nursery Sebastian had built, watching snow fall over the winter gardens. The room was warm despite the cold outside, hearth fire crackling cheerfully, and moonlight streamed through windows etched with both windrider and thornwood crests intertwined. Her daughter kicked beneath her hand, strong and impatient. "Not much longer," she murmured. "A few more weeks, and you'll be here. And then I'll teach you everything my grandmother taught me." Arms wrapped around her from behind, Sebastian's warmth pressing against her back. Through the bond, she felt his contentment, deep and steady, unmarred by the shadows that had haunted him for so long. "I've been practicing," he said softly. "Practicing what?" Instead of answering, he began to sing. The words were Thornwood, old Thornwood, the language her grandmother had spoken, that fewer than a dozen wolves in the world remembered. He stumbled slightly over the unfamiliar sounds, but the melody was perfect, the lullaby Dahlia had heard every night of her childhood rising from her mate's throat. Tears streamed down her cheeks before she realized she was crying. "How?" Her voice broke. "How did you?" The scholars found records in the archives, old songs, written down by wolves who wanted to preserve what was being lost. He pressed his lips to her hair. "I learned it phoneme by phoneme. It took months. I wanted to be able to sing to her the way your grandmother sang to you." 7 languages he already spoke, and he had learned an 8th for this, for their daughter, for the heritage that had almost been forgotten. "I love you," Dahlia whispered. "I don't think I've said it enough. I love you. You say it every time you look at me." He turned her in his arms, cupping her face in his massive hands. "You say it through the bond. You say it in the way you protect our child, the way you faced Neve without flinching, the way you chose to trust me when you had every reason not to." She leaned into his touch, feeling the mate bond pulse between them. Steady, sure, eternal. The Ashwood Pack had been dissolved 2 weeks after Neve's exile, its members absorbed into kinder packs under Sebastian's careful supervision. Alpha Marcus awaited trial for conspiracy against the crown, his territory already divided among those who had been loyal to true law rather than petty vengeance. The forged evidence had been destroyed, Dahlia's name cleared in official records, and the Thornwood heritage was being preserved at last. Scholars collecting songs and stories, the language being taught to young wolves who wanted to learn, a whole culture that had nearly been lost, now protected by the Alpha King's decree. "She'll know both her heritages," Sebastian said, palm warm against her belly. "She'll know the Windrider's strength and the Thornwood resilience. She'll know her father loved her mother from the first moment he saw her, and that nothing, not chains, not poison, not the machinations of jealous wolves, could ever break that bond." Dahlia pressed her forehead to his, feeling their wolves curl together in perfect peace. "I thought I was broken when they brought me here," she said softly. "I thought I was damaged goods, just like Marcus said, something to be discarded." "You were never broken." Sebastian's voice was fierce. "You were forged. Every hardship, every betrayal, every moment of pain, it made you strong enough to stand in my throne room and make me fall to my knees with a single look. I don't remember you kneeling. I was kneeling on the inside." He smiled, and it transformed his face from blade sharp to achingly tender. "I will kneel to you for the rest of my life, if you ask it. You are my queen, my Luna, my mate. You are everything." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the palace grounds in white. Inside, Warmth and love and the promise of new life filled every corner of the nursery. Dahlia leaned into her mate's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady against her ear, feeling their daughter kick in response to her father's voice, feeling the bond that connected them pulse with joy. She was home.